Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 209.
On today's show, we continue our series on paleoanthropology and human origins.
Let's dig a little deeper, but not too deep because we get into expert territory and I don't want to get emails. All right, welcome to the show, everyone.
Hello.
So we're still down in Mexico, as people know.
Yes.
I want to start real quick because the event, I guess, that we were, if you want to call it that, the gathering, we call it a convergence, that we were down here for in February, introduced us to a lot of new friends and people that now know about the podcast and are possibly listening. So I want to say welcome to our new listeners. It's glad to have you here. It's weird to know people that are listening to the show.
I know. Now I have to I don't know, be better. But I want to be good for everybody. But when you know that somebody you actually know could send you a message and be like, that thing you said was really dumb. So
I know, right?
Do better now.
I know. It's fine when we get those messages from random people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that.
Yeah. So we got one about our first episode of the Paleoanthropology series.
Yeah.
And the commenter basically said that we didn't cover enough. They mentioned a Nature article that they linked to that's actually paywalled, so that's not very helpful for me.
Yeah, we can't see those.
It's discussing how our early theories about the common ancestor for basically humans and chimpanzees is somewhat sooner, but also somewhat more different than we thought.
Yeah.
I never mentioned what the common ancestor was in the last episode. I just mentioned that there was a common ancestor.
Yeah.
I thought I'd remembered something about up to 20 million years ago. It could be sooner than that.
It could be.
More recent, but that wasn't really the focus of the discussion.
No.
So it's good to know. But
it is. Yeah, we're just trying to cover the main fossils that fit into the evolutionary tree.
Yeah.
And when they were discovered and who discovered them and where they fit and what their characteristics are. So, and we're not going super in depth. We just can't cover everything.
Well, we're not paleoanthropologists.
It's a huge field. Yeah. So we're trying to keep it broad.
Also, there was another comment about us mentioning the aquatic ape theory, and it's been out of favor by anthropologists for a long time now.
It's definitely borderline pseudoscience for sure.
It was a theory based on observations, right? And there's been lots of theories based on observations of lots of different things. Paleoanthropology and human evolution is no stranger to that. And people's ideas of why something looks the way that it does, trying to explain traits that it has, have massively changed over the last 100 years. I mean, massively changed, right? Every time we find something new or we have new evidence, something changes. When the person who proposed the aquatic ape theory in the 60s came out with that, it wasn't immediately scoffed at, but it was a way to attempt to explain some of the traits that they were seeing. And then future evidence showed that, well, no, actually, this doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think that's the important part is you can sit around and come up with theories all day long, but if you don't have the evidence to back them up, then you have to let go of that theory. And there's actually another one that we're going to talk about today in this episode that we'll get to, because today we're talking about Australopithecus and all the different fossils that fit into that family of species.
And one more thing to note just regarding the aquatic ape theory, the only reason I even mentioned it at all is because it's still something you see. It's still something you see in even textbooks.
Yes.
It's mentioned. It's something you see in resources. If you're looking online, researching human evolution, it's mentioned maybe as a passing comment, as a theory that we used to think, for some traits. So that's the only reason I mentioned it. And you know what? I'll tell you what, the audience for this show is not people who are experts in paleoanthropology.
Right.
The audience is people who may have heard nothing, if not maybe a few things about paleoanthropology. They kind of know what we're talking about. And our job is to just hit the highlights on this. We want to talk about the big players in the human evolutionary bush, if you want to call it that, the tree, so to speak, and just just kind of talk about them and about what they look like and where they were and what they mean to the human family tree. Our interpretations of how they fit in and how that evolution actually happened, of course, is changing. And we may not have the most recent papers that discuss that. We just don't have access to them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's always good to be aware of the fact that in a field that's kind of rapidly changing, like paleoanthropology, you have to know what past researchers believed or thought in order to understand where we're at today.
Yeah.
So even though that's not a theory that's widely accepted, it's still good to know that it's something that people thought about in the past and has now been dismissed. So it's good to have that history of it.
Okay, so continuing on from last week,
yes,
we are going to continue marching down the family tree towards actually from
forward
the roots
in
up
time.
the family tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it is kind of up, but forward in time is where we're moving to.
Yeah.
And the first species we're going to talk about is Australopithecus anamensis.
Yeah.
So these guys lived in the 4.2 to 3.8 million years ago range. And it was primarily in Eastern Africa, like Lake Turkana, Kenya, and the Middle Awash area of Ethiopia.
Yeah. So it's interesting that Australopithecus, that you're going to hear a lot about Australopithecus. And I believe it means southern ape, Australopithecus, southern ape.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Right. And then usually the last part is something to do with where it was found, along those lines. But yeah, 4.2 to 3.8 million years ago. This is previous to Lucy, who you might be thinking you've heard of. She's a really famous Australopithecus. We'll get to her. She's a little different.
Yep, that's coming in segment 2.
Yep. So this one, as with pretty much everything from this point forward until you start getting into the Homo line, has human and, modern human, or at least hominid and ape-like traits.
Hominid and ape things going on. So we'll kind of list the things that are more ape-like and then the things that are more hominid-like, and you can kind of see how it's becoming sort of a cross between the two.
Yeah, and what puts this into the again the human family tree is usually things like, it's a mammal, it's ape-like, and it can walk upright.
And it walked. Yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah.
There's other things too, but this one, for example, the upper end of its tibia is expanded as compared to other apes, I would assume.
Yeah, kind of like a wider shape.
Right. Maybe to hold more weight. Yeah. And has a human-like orientation indicating bipedalism.
And the tibia, by the way, is one of your lower leg bones. So it connects with the femur in your knee area. And so the head of it, or the end of it, is talking about that joint where it connects with the femur.
And when we talk about walking upright too, you might think, I was at the zoo last weekend and I saw monkeys walking upright. Well, when we mean bipedalism and walking upright, we mean full or most time walking upright.
Yeah.
It might not be all the time.
Yeah.
They may have come down on all fours occasionally. I don't know. There's a family I read about in Turkey that walks on all fours, which is crazy. Look that up. Look up family in Turkey that walks on all fours and you will be amazed.
Yeah.
So, but anyway.
There's always exceptions and there's always different situations that can happen. Yeah.
For sure. But bipedalism, when we start naming a new species and looking at that, the bone won't change if you only do it occasionally.
Right.
The bone changes evolutionarily if you do that most, if not all the time.
And then it becomes selected for, and it becomes a trait that moves forward.
It does if it makes you get with the ladies. I mean, that's really what that means.
Yeah. So in the anamensis species, the ankle joint also has a sort of human-like orientation. And this is another reason why we think that they were probably bipedal.
Yeah. All comes down to the bones.
Yeah. But they also have long forearms, and the wrist bones and the structure of them, they indicate that they probably were climbing in trees as well. Maybe not a lot, but they had the ability to if they needed to or wanted to. Right.
And again, it doesn't even mean they did climb trees. It means that they have similar traits to other animals that climb trees.
Yes.
That we know climb trees.
Yeah. Because we can't know what their behavior was. Obviously, there's no way to know that. We just can look at their bones and look at the structure and say, well, they could have done this.
Well, and as they were changing, obviously they weren't changing individually. They were changing over, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have known they were changing.
Right.
But they could have had these tree climbing adaptations, but maybe not used them very much. But that takes a long time to kind of go away if you're not going to use it in the evolutionary record.
I can go climb a tree right now.
You can't swing from trees.
I'm not sure I would do very well at it, but I could do it.
Well, that's the thing. We have people that live in, jungle and those types of environments, and then just crazy people who like to do parkour.
Yeah.
They can just parkour through the trees
right.
and do whatever they want. Those people are nuts.
Yes.
But are they adapted specially for that purpose? No, they've just learned how to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a difference between an adaptation and a learned skill and just strength training and things like that.
Yeah,
so.
for sure. The cranium of Anamensis also has a mix of ape and human-like features. And on the ape side of things, they've got a protruding face and a long, narrow brain case. So typical of apes. And then on the human side of things, they have forwardly projecting cheekbones. So there you go. Kind of that mix again. These species, they all have like this mix of different things going on that...
Do I have forwardly projecting cheekbones? I guess I do. Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
My mom really does. She's got some cheekbones.
Oh, man. All right. Yeah, the first fossil of this was found in 1965 by Brian Patterson from Harvard. It was a single arm bone, and the species couldn't be identified yet. They didn't know what it was. It's kind of hard to do that off just like a single arm bone.
Just a bone.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at that point, when you have just this disparate bone, you need more data before you can actually assign a new species to it. And so very smartly, they sort of found it, set it aside, and were like, well, this is something, and we're not going to give it a species yet. And, 30 years later, they finally were able to put a name to it.
And then... all the way up in 1994, our first sighting of paleoanthropological royalty takes place in this podcast series.
Yeah.
And Meave Leakey found teeth and bone fragments at the same site.
Yeah.
They recognized it as a new species and called it Australopithecus anamensis. Now, Meave Leakey... again, she is paleoanthropological royalty.
Yeah.
This is the only family that I'm aware of that has multiple generations in the same field that have made such massive contributions, right? I mean, there might be other, I'm sure I'm just going to get an email on that one comment where somebody says, well, what about the cultural anthropology family, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, so nobody knows about them.
Yeah.
The Leakeys, it's like if Jane Goodall had kids and then
that
their
kept
kids
on doing primatology,
and they were just as famous.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like Meave Leakey is just as famous as her grandparents, Lewis and Mary Leakey, who kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah.
And then Richard Leakey, who is Lewis and Mary Leakey's son and Meave Leakey's father, he was huge in paleoanthropology as well, but not as big. He got more into Kenyan politics, and actually he was instrumental in stopping the ivory trade.
Right.
And the killing of elephants, basically, for their ivory.
Yeah.
And I think that also went along with, like, what is it, hippo horns or something, or rhino horns?
Rhino horns, yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't as much, but it was the killing of the elephants for their tusks. That was big.
Yeah, totally.
So, in fact, I'm pretty sure I read a book. He was instrumental in. There was a famous picture that went around from the 80s or something like that, where it was just a massive pile of what equated to many, many dollars worth of ivory tusks burning.
Oh, wow.
He just burned them and said, nope, no more.
No, like if they exist, then the trade still exists. So
right.
As sad as it is to burn it, it's probably better to just get rid of it.
So they kept on looking around in this area, and most recently in 2019, a team led by Johannes Haile Selassie announced a nearly complete cranium dating to 3.8 million years ago. So all relating to the same species.
Yeah, and what I loved about that is, so that's fairly recent, just 4 years ago. And what the dating on that cranium did, and this cranium is very solidly in the Anamensis category. And that dating on it, it causes it to overlap with the next species that we're going to talk about, which is Australopithecus afarensis. And the reason why that is significant is because this overlap means that Anamensis is not just the descendant of afarensis. They overlapped. So they might have been sharing genes, their DNA overlapping. Like there could be actual genetic overlap happening there rather than just one being the descendant of the other. And I think that really changes the way we look at these two species, because these two are very big players as far as what our family tree looks like, because we have a lot of examples of them and they're pretty well established as to when they lived and what they look like and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. And that's just shows that this field is always getting pushed forward. We're always going to find new things. The dates are going to change things, and we're going to have to change the way that we think about the way these species fit together in this tree. it's really cool.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about if we're talking about royalty in paleoanthropology being the Leakeys, well, then Lucy's the princess.
Yeah,
because everybody knows her just about as much.
The Leakeys weren't involved in this one.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we come back.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 209. And this is our second episode in our paleoanthropology series for beginners. I got to say, if you're an expert, turn off this podcast and go somewhere else.
You're not going to like it, probably. Not
that we're saying anything wrong.
It's just very broad.
Yes, very broad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, talking about Lucy, and she was, well, we'll get to why she was named Lucy here in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the next species we're going to cover is Australopithecus afarensis. And these guys date to between 3.85 and 2.95 million years ago. Mm-hmm. And that is like a 900,000 year period. It's huge. Yeah. So these fossils span more than 900,000 years. That's a huge amount of time. And they're found across Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. Yeah.
They are one of the best known species, probably because of the long time span. And there's been a number of species named in the Australopithecus genus. And there's a number of them, and then we have lots of examples of them as well, and some really good examples. And Lucy is probably one of the best known of this species and of the Australopithecus line, because we have remains from over 300 individuals, first off, for Australopithecus afarensis. But then Lucy herself was lots of bones.
Yeah, she was the first one.
Yeah.
At least the first one we named. Identified. Yeah, the first one given the name Australopithecus afarensis. I think there's older ones that were grouped into it later on.
Yeah.
But her skeleton is like nearly complete, and we saw it. We got to see it in person.
In Dallas or Houston? When it was coming through
Houston,
the States?
I think it was. And this is probably 10, 12 years ago now. Yeah. So it was a long time, and it did a tour throughout the United States, and that was so cool to go actually see the fossilized remains of a 3 however million years ago. Right. I don't remember what her exact date is, but it's in that 900-year time frame, and that was just amazing to see something that old.
And she was originally discovered in 1974 by Donald Johanson and team. I'm going to put an asterisk on that. And they nicknamed her Lucy. She was found in Hadar area of Ethiopia.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing. I'm pretty sure, and I didn't look at this before this podcast, but I'm pretty sure she was not found by Donald Johanson. It was obviously his team.
Yeah, he was part of the team.
And from what I remember, it's like every other archaeological discovery on a site, they were just about done with that area, and they were walking away. And one of the other team members, I can't remember what his name is, he never went on to his own like big fame like this. But one of the other team members found some fossils eroding out of a hillside, and they looked at it and then ended up coming back. And then when they brought it all to the field lab as they were excavating it, and I think it was around the time that they determined it was a female, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds from the Beatles was playing on their little tape recorder. They had the tape of it playing. Yeah. And that's why she got the name Lucy.
Yeah. Thanks to the Beatles. Makes sense, though, in that time
Beatles,
period.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to get that wrong. Yeah.
So there are some other famous fossils, obviously, with over 300 samples. There's a lot of famous fossils in this category, but some of the other ones are the first family, which was found in Hadar, Ethiopia. And then in Dakika, Ethiopia, the Dakika child skeleton was found.
Yeah, the first family was cool because it was a number of individuals, and it looked like, almost a mother, father, child, relationship, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But again, you can't really make those associations. We don't have DNA.
And like, family is a modern construct that we have today, and assigning that to a species that's distantly related to us is kind of maybe not the best idea, but it's still really cute and sweet to think that they were a little family together.
Right.
So. And then we get to my favorite fossil ever, because it's not an actual fossil.
No, it's just more rock though.
Yeah, the Laetoli footprints. And these are the oldest documented bipedal footprints that we have to this date. And I think my love for footprints, I think we've talked about this before, because we've had some footprints that were found in the United States that are super old and are beginning to push back the dates in the United States for human arrival.
Yeah.
And here too. I just love them. I just think they're so cool. It's a thing that doesn't stick around 99.9% of the time.
Yeah.
But when it does stick around, it's just such a human thing to leave behind. And I know that these are not technically humans, but it just feels so human to see their footprints. So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The entire trackway is about 88 feet long or 27 meters and includes impressions of about 70 early human footprints. And here's the thing. If I'm not mistaken, they were walking through like soft clay, or probably like could have been like near a lake edge or something like that, but something soft enough to make the footprints, but not have them kind of collapse in on themselves. And they were almost immediately covered soon enough after they walked over them by basically ashfall from a volcano. So maybe nearby, there's also 70 early hominids, clustered around like Pompeii style.
Pompeii style. Yeah.
I don't really know.
Maybe.
We haven't found them.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, but we do know that that's probably how the footprints were preserved so well.
Yeah.
And here's a cool thing. Well, first off, they were found in 1978 by Paul Abel, who was on Mary Leakey's team.
Yeah.
Louis Leakey died in 1971, I want to say.
Yeah.
He died really
right.
young. And he was more the figurehead of the Leakey family. He kind of kicked this whole thing off.
He wrote a lot of the books early on and stuff too, right?
He's famous, almost more famous than Mary, only because he wrote the books.
Yeah.
He authored the books. Mary obviously contributed a lot to those.
A lot of research to them.
Lewis was the one that had the National Geographic grants and was going around on speaking tours. He was the front-facing image of this, and Mary was back digging up the actual fossils.
50s, 60s, 70s, of course he was the face of it.
30s, 40s.
Yeah.
So,
of course he was the face. That was the society they lived in.
But you got to read some of those early books by the Leakeys and their adventures out into Olduvai Gorge. And I remember one where they just something happened to their water and they ran out of water, and the nearest water supply just was full of like hippo and rhinoceros urine, and it was gross. And so they tried to collect water it would rain occasionally. And when it did rain, they tried to collect water coming off a tarp that they had brought with them. But back then, the plastic of the tarps, it was coated in like kerosene.
Oh God.
And they didn't really think about
kerosene water. No.
Yeah. So then they're like, this water doesn't taste good.
Oh God.
Yeah. They ended up doing some other stuff, but it was all just crazy back in that time trying to figure out all that stuff. So
very, very rural.
Another cool thing is I went to Africa in 2005 on an Earthwatch expedition, stayed in the Leakey camp, saw Mary Leakey's hut. The expedition director was living for the 3 weeks in her hut.
Yeah.
It's still a working research camp, right? There's a lab there. There's probably other buildings there now. This was 2005. I was there.
Yeah.
And that lab building had actually solar panels and some batteries, like rudimentary solar panels and batteries to give it power through the day when the sun was up, and then for a few hours at night after the sun went down, because the batteries weren't like super great. But we lived, and I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the same little kitchen area that the Leakeys ate at, for many years. And it was really cool. And in the lab, outside the lab, sitting on some very shaky wooden, like sawhorse kind of things, was a massive section of the Laetoli trackway that they literally sawed out with concrete saws, lifted out and took to Olduvai Gorge, took to the Leakey camp.
Feels like the wrong thing to do, but
yeah. So in future years they took casts of them, of course, but they literally took. I've seen a piece of it.
Wow.
We never went down to Laetoli; it was too far away.
Yeah, okay.
But I've literally seen and touched the piece of the trackway that is sitting at the Leakey camp, which is just nuts.
Oh, that's so crazy.
So,
well, the other thing that I just wanted to mention, because this show, hey, look, it's our pop culture reference for the episode, because we have to have at least one.
Wow.
So we've been watching 1923 recently, which is one of the Yellowstone prequels. And in it, the two that are in Africa, we don't need to go into their whole plot line, but there's two that are in Africa, and the man takes a woman over to see a footprint encased in stone that is like the dawn of humanity, blah, blah, blah. And they don't say it in the show, but they're probably referring to these footprints because there aren't any others. And in the area that they're in, it would be the Laetoli footprints. They're like saying that happened in 1923, which would be like 50 years before these were even discovered by the
here's
Leakeys.
the thing. Here's the thing. Paul Abel of the Leakey team, like I said, 1978, but that's probably when it was made known to the scientific community. I'm willing to bet local people knew about that stuff for a long time.
Maybe. The reason they were in that area at all is because there were there were animal tracks. And so they were thinking, well, if there's animal tracks here, maybe we'll find something else. So they started
there's lots
exploring.
of tracks at Laetoli.
Yeah. So they started exploring and looking for more things. So anyway, sorry, 1923. That was maybe not your best move to
Right.
indicate that these two people discovered. Although the Duttons, I wouldn't put anything past the Duttons. Maybe they did discover the Laetoli footprints before
wouldn't
before
surprise me.
the researchers actually did.
Yeah.
Anyway. Oh, man. So other things to note about the Afarensis species is childhood development was shorter. So they would have spent a lot less time with the parents. It just is less time for everything that you learn from parents. It's just more of the ape style of development rather than the human style of development. But like previous species, they did have both human and ape characteristics.
Yeah, they had a flat nose, projecting lower jaw, small brain, long arms for tree climbing. Those were all their ape characteristics.
And then the human ones are small canine teeth and a body that stood on two legs, of course, and walked upright.
Yeah, and they were short. The diet for this species was much like other things in that area, I would imagine, was mainly plant-based, including leaves, fruit, seeds, roots, nuts, and maybe some insects and small animals like lizards and grubs.
Yeah. And
Grubs.
Gross.
That's a 25-year-old reference.
Oh, I don't even get that one.
Lion King?
Oh, Lion King. Right, totally.
Yeah. What do they say? They pop but are like sweet?
Oh, that's right.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
My favorite part, though, was that you just like spluttered at me because I didn't get your Lion King reference. That was really good.
I can't believe that.
I know. Well,
You were like a child when that came out.
I was, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Well, you might be wondering how they can tell diet, obviously, from just fossilized remains, but it's because of their teeth. So they can look at the wear, the dental wear on their teeth, and they've got over 300 individuals to look at, so they have a lot of teeth for the species that they can analyze, and that's how they've come up with this list of things that they were eating.
Yeah, there's people that go around, they're crazy, but they go around doing experimental archaeology and then also looking at the typical diets of similar species now today and what their teeth look like versus fossilized and earlier examples of these species, not just hominid or human species or Australopithecus, but lots of stuff. And they say, okay, so when something lives mostly off of grasses and things like that, this is what their teeth look like, and we know that, like, for example, chimpanzees today, they'll pull off a blade of grass or a branch or something and they'll run it through their teeth and pull off all the leaves and stuff. And that has a very specific type of wear pattern when you do it every single day for your entire life.
Yep.
So there's lots of stuff we can see. And probably those things that are listed right there are things that would have been accessible to them. They would have been tasty, so why not eat them?
Yep.
And they could have eaten them, so they probably did try.
Yeah.
And the wear patterns indicate that, that's probably it.
Yeah,
so.
definitely.
All right. Well, that's it for Lucy. She's pretty cool. Take a look.
Yep.
And
oh, do you remember my I Love Lucy shirt I had for the longest time?
You don't have that anymore?
No, because it just fell apart. But when we went to see Lucy in Houston, I had a shirt. It looked like I Love Lucy, the show. It said, but it was I Love and then the skeleton of Lucy. Man,
Right.
I miss that shirt.
All right. Well, Lucy was found up in Ethiopia, which is at the northern end of the African continent. On the other side of the break, we're going to the southern end of the African continent to finally talk about Australopithecus, the southern ape. Back in a minute.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Layman's Guide to Paleoanthropology, Part 2.
Come on, it's a little better than that. We both took classes on this in college and stuff.
I more studied it independently.
Yeah, you did.
My school didn't really. I mean, we talked about obviously early hominid evolution as was known in 2001.
Right.
But we didn't really dive deep into it. I deep dove it because I just love origins type stories and knowing where we come from.
I mean, I definitely took a class on it that was specific paleoanthropology, but again, it was 2003 paleoanthropology, so it's been a little while. But anyway, the next species we're going to talk about is still Australopithecus, but this is Australopithecus africanus.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple other smaller groups that we don't have as many fossils to that we're going to talk about in this one. So,
yep. So Africanus dates to 3.3 to 2.1 million years ago, found primarily in South Africa in this case.
Yeah. So we're like going very far away from where the other fossils were found.
Yeah, long ways away.
Yeah.
Very similar to Afarensis with a mix of both ape and human-like features. Sound like a broken record there.
I know, right?
Yep. They have a rounder cranium than Afarensis with a larger brain and smaller teeth.
Yeah.
And larger brain is kind of the trend that you see in the hominid line. It's weird that it doesn't get like a whole lot larger over the course of millions of years.
Yeah.
And then like 1 to 2 million years ago, it started getting dramatically bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that a lot more in the next episode when we go into the Homo category.
Right.
But yeah, so the other thing that indicates that it's in our, ancestral line is that the pelvis, leg, and foot bones indicate that it walked bipedally. Again, broken record. All of these species get included because they can walk upright, basically.
Now, here's the thing real quick about that. Just because it did walk bipedally, I want to correct what I possibly said in the first segment. I think it was bipedal locomotion does not indicate you definitely are a human ancestor if you're an ape.
True.
It just means you could have been.
Yes.
Right? So some of these species that lived either concurrently or, if there was a march of this one lived, then this one lived, then this one lived, obviously they're going to overlap because that's how evolution works.
Yeah.
But if they overlap by a lot and they live together, maybe on different ends of the continent in this case, but maybe even in the same areas, some of those may or may not be part of our actual human family tree. They were just other species that happened to be doing a similar thing, but then the line died out.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Yeah.
So,
you can't assume that they were in a direct line to us, but that's why we have this like bush tree concept rather than the straight line concept of evolution. It wasn't straight line. It couldn't be. Yeah,
it's entirely possible they could have contributed some genetic material because of some mixing that produced viable offspring in some cases. But we really don't know, and there's no way that we can know.
No.
Especially when they live concurrently like that.
Right. Until time machines are invented. We don't get to know the answers to these questions. Is that the first thing you're going to do if time machines are invented? Is like go back and figure out what human evolution looked like? Pretty
much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and I don't know, probably give Lucy a little nameplate that says my name is Lucy and say never let this go so we can find it later. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
Anyway, this species also had long arms and shoulders and hands that were probably adapted for climbing. Yeah.
Just like past species,
Yeah,
they could have done it.
Climbing is something that was just like had to happen in Africa, with the trees, just to stay safe.
Yeah, I mean, again, not to reference 1923 again, but in an Africa scene again, they escape from lions by climbing up in trees, and that feels legit. Just to get away from a large predator, a tree is a really good place to go.
Yeah, you want to sleep soundly at night before you've invented fire? You're probably going to do it in a tree.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we're making assumptions here, and these are just silly musings that we're having.
It could have happened.
But it could have happened.
Yeah, they're adapted for it.
Yes.
Somewhat. So it doesn't mean they didn't do it.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
We also have fairly solid evidence that they, sometimes went into caves and maybe stayed in there for a longer period of time. Not like a habitation kind of thing, but then also there are some caves, especially in South Africa, where we found these guys munched up and eaten by like cheetahs and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one famous example. I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but I can't remember. But there was like a tree. Well, they think what happened was because there's a lot of these limestone holes basically just out on the flat African landscape, and then you're walking along and the cave's entrance is like you're looking at it like a well. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then, so there was a theory on one of those. They just found like lots of different animal species, including early hominids and probably Australopithecus down in this hole. And they thought, well, cheetahs for years were probably, because they like to drag their prey up into the tree.
Oh.
And then they'd eat it, and the pieces of it would just fall down into this cave.
Right.
And then, that's where it would end up. So.
Well, I'm sure we were a delicious cheetah snack. So
I'm sure.
I could buy that theory.
Yeah, Cheetos.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the first fossil of this was called the Taung child, Taung, and was described and named by, again, sort of paleoanthropology royalty.
Like royalty, yeah.
Raymond Dart in 1924. He did a lot of stuff down in South Africa. I think he was with the University of Johannesburg, but I can't remember.
I'm not sure. I didn't really research.
He was in that area
closely.
a little bit.
Yeah. But he started the whole hunter-gatherer idea too back in in his days when he was doing a lot of research.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to thank him for sure.
So the Tongue Child was the first fossil of that kind to be found in Africa, and started leading people to think that, hey, maybe humans did actually evolve in Africa.
Yeah.
You know, because it obviously wasn't human, but had a lot of human-like traits. And this was what sort of kicked off those theories.
And in 1924, they wouldn't have really had a great way of dating it necessarily yet, but they could tell that it was old. Yeah. It was old, and it was sharing characteristics between apes and human. And of course, like you would expect when you have a lot of academics, probably European academics involved, it took 20 years for it to even be accepted as being part of the human evolutionary tree, because, you know, coming from Africa, that was just not something that people were willing to accept, that human origins started someplace like Africa.
Especially the staunch British that were verifying all this stuff and bringing
Europeans
people into
and Americans together probably were doing this, but
it was more the British.
Sorry, British listeners. Anyway,
I mean, they know what their history is. I mean, Raymond Dart was, again, South Africa. But South Africa was populated by the British. They were colonized by the British, I should say. And I want to say Australia too. I can't remember. Anyway, the British were big in all parts of Africa at that time, and at least Eastern and Southern Africa. And I mean, things were being reported back. If you wanted to publish a paper, you know, you did it in British journals with the British scientific societies of the day, right? So,
and those societies weren't always super excited about finding human origins in Africa rather than in the places that they lived, because that it's also when you have like the Piltdown Man hoax, right? Because they wanted human origins to be in their area, not in Africa. There's a lot of racism and stuff sort of wrapped up in this too. So
things back in that time, because of technology and because of just communication, worked at kind of a glacial pace too. It took almost 20 years for this to be accepted as part of the human evolutionary tree, but also Raymond Dart was like super slow and methodical. I remember one of the fossils he found, it could have been the Tongue Child, was actually encased in like limestone.
And you had like pick it apart.
I think it was found at a quarry, and he was asked to come out because they found something and they didn't know who else to call. Somebody tracked him down. He came out to this quarry. They handed him these things, and it took, if I'm not mistaken, it took years to crack this thing out of all this, like just tiny meticulous, because you almost couldn't separate like the limestone rock from the skull.
From the fossil.
The fossil. And it was just crazy how meticulous it was. I remember reading that in one of the books about him. So,
well, here's a fun side note. So, and this is a really great example of somebody who is really, really important to the field, Raymond Dart, having a bad idea that was wrong, but he didn't know it at the time.
I can't wait for you to pronounce this word. Go.
So Dart created the idea of the osteodontokeratic culture.
Oh, that's not bad.
Take that. Did it. And what that word means, osteo is bone, donto is dental, and keratic is horn. So these are the bones, large bones, horn.
Bone teeth horns?
Bone teeth horns. But all of those.
What is a horn tooth?
Well, they're not together in the same thing. They are separate pieces.
Okay.
So, and what he did is, around the Tongue Child, they found these broken animal bones and horns and things, and he associated them with the fossil. They were fossilized too. He associated them with the fossil, and basically it was like, oh, all these broken animal bones are around here. Obviously, the humans were breaking these bones and getting to the marrow and eating animals, and that's what these bones are. But it turns out, after they looked at these bones again later on, 30, 40, 50 years later or whatever it was, that the way these bones were broken was not by humans or human tools. It was just by predators like lions and leopards. It's the way that they... Like
the story I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what they do to bones. So that whole idea that this early species was eating animals was just not true. But he definitely started the idea that was true, and then they had to, go back on it later on because it wasn't true.
I bet if you were to look at evolution and this whole history from a cheetah's perspective, If the cheetahs had evolved to have these histories, they'd be like, man, at some point in time, like it was really hard to find food. And then these apes started like spending more time on the savannah.
Yeah.
It was like a buffet for 3 million years.
Although
it got slower.
Hold on, though. From a cheetah perspective, though, like what's the difference between an ape and a like human ancestor ape, right? Like they're basically the same thing.
But the true apes, they could just like fling themselves up into the trees and then jump from tree to tree.
Yeah, that's true.
But when we
true.
started getting bigger and less good at it, we just got slower and probably tastier.
Just cheetah food.
Yeah, cheetah food. We started getting fatter and we're just like, ugh. Yeah, so. All right, so another one is called Australopithecus garhi, Garhi, 2.5 million years ago in the middle awash of Ethiopia, so back to northern Africa.
Mm-hmm. And this species is much less well known. We only have a cranium and partial skeleton for the Australopithecus garhi species. And these were found by Tim White and Burhane Asfaw.
Yeah. They work together a lot, actually.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah.
And there's honestly not a whole lot for this species designation. They just have those bits of skeleton, but they are kind of like super, super important bits.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because while Raymond Dart wanted those bones found near his Tong child to be from the people eating the animals, these guys do actually have evidence of stone tool use and animal eating in association with these skeleton remains.
Right.
So this is not a lot of bones for a species designation. However, it is a very important one because they found stone tools in association with these bones.
So, like we said, we don't have a lot of bones for this species, but it is one of the earliest examples we have of bones of this type, so Australopithecus, being associated with stone tools, I'll talk about that in a second, and animal bones. And these animal bones appear to have been broken and or cut, so to speak, but smashed probably with these stone tools. Now, stone tools is probably a little bit of a stretch. You can pick up a rock from a riverbed and smash it with something and it suddenly becomes a tool, right? We don't probably mean that they were crafting the shapes of these stone tools.
Right.
Some of the earliest stone tools we have that were crafted in shape, we'll probably talk about in the next series, but that was 1 to 2 million years by Homo habilis.
Right.
Habilis means handyman.
Yes.
And those were just the Oldowan choppers, they were called. And I've seen these. I've seen some of these at the Olduvai Museum just outside the Leakey camp and in the Leakey camp. And they're literally just cobbles with a couple flakes taken off to make kind of a sharp edge.
A sharp edge, yeah.
Yeah, you really just probably bang the cobbles together without knowing what you're doing because you knew that would make a sharp edge.
Yeah.
And those were used to like chop open bones, suck out the marrow, you know, cut animals up, things like that. So it's possible Australopithecus afarensis was doing this back then with those tools, because we have actually seen chimpanzees use tools too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, they might not have been forming these stone tools specifically for that purpose, but
they're using something other than their hands.
Yeah. They're picking up a stone that might naturally have a sharp edge on it and using that to cut into animal bones. And we know that because the wear on the animal bones is not what you see from either other predators or from natural breakage. It was done intentionally by something with a sharp edge.
And what's cool is for the longest time, we thought that was a uniquely leading to human trait, is using something else to accomplish a task, right? But we now know, and a lot of research has been done, like crows use sticks and stuff. Definitely chimpanzees and gorillas. And they use a stick to get into an anthill and pull it out and suck it off like it's candy.
Yeah. Gross. But
I know. Yeah. It's pretty gross.
Yeah.
But it also, like, what is it, like sea otters or something, when they lay on their back to like use something to smash open like a clam or something like that.
Or even as simple as birds dropping that's stuff down to the ground to break them open.
Maybe. That's kind of reverse tool usage, right?
Yeah, it's not really a tool.
They're not using the rock.
It's a process.
If they were dropping a rock on a clamshell, that I'll give you.
Yeah.
But it's close to it, right? So there's a lot of other species that are using different things. They're very intelligent in that respect.
Yeah.
But this line, I mean, this started leading to, okay, so if I can break open this bone with this rock, what else can I do with it? You know, that's where that thinking led. It took us a few million years to get that thinking under control.
Yeah.
But it started leading to intentionally doing this, whereas most stone tool usage at that time and even before then, when we don't have evidence for it, was probably opportunistic.
Probably.
I'm going to pick this up because it looks heavy. I'm going to smash it.
And crush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, definitely. But we'll talk about more about early hominid tool use and everything that means in our next episode.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, with that, hopefully your fingers aren't sore from writing all the angry emails about what we didn't cover. And
there's so much.
I know. And again, we're not doing an in-depth deconstruction of all this stuff. We're trying to hit the highlights for people this is maybe their first exposure to this topic. And because that's what our audience is for this show.
Yeah.
I have a lot of ideas if we can ever get enough members and or advertising, hint, arcpodnet.com/members. If we get the money to do it, and we need dedicated resources for this. We started a parent company called Culturo Media, and Culturo Media, under that heading, is the Archaeology Podcast Network and our Culturo Share events. So go check that out, culturomedia.com. And our next one's coming up in May, actually, on early parenthood and child development. And the person who runs that is having a baby the month before that. So that's probably why she wanted that topic. But anyway, it's her second child. But anyway, we are doing a lot of things under that space, but I want to start other podcast networks. And one of those is a Paleoanthropology podcast network because I just love the subject. I couldn't host it. I don't have the knowledge. Yeah. But I would want to be part of it in some way.
You could be like a color commentator, right?
I can be the one that makes jokes and Indiana Jones references.
Right.
Yeah. So
totally.
But I'd have to make like Jurassic Park references because archaeologists don't do dinosaurs.
No.
And with that, we'll see you next week. Go watch the Indiana Jones 5 trailer. They're trying to make up for bad mistakes and poor decisions.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.arcpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArcPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
.com.